Morning, Michael.
There's Michael. Oh, that's Michael. Morning, Michael. Okay. Learning sponsors. You're learning friends of Nina Monester, Nechama Asab and Yitzhak Aaron, many friends of Stephen Vigder, Stefan Nishmas, Simcha Melach, and Meir Leva Levi, friends of Marcy Kurtz in memory of her great niece, Leah Brocha, Yitzhak and Evelyn Blocker in memory of his sister, Chaya Rachel Bas Iser. Friends of Leonie Meiselman, Leah Sabra Ben Hanach Zunda. A month of learning sponsored by Sam and Schiffer Coleman in memory of his mother, Sarah Rachel Bas Abram, and my wife and myself in honor of my father, Vashon Svi Ben Pinchas, a week of learning, Manny Wortman, in memory of his wife, Chaya Sorabas Alter Yosef, and a week of learning by Michael and Sharon Glass, in memory of his father, Yitzhak Tzvi Ben Yichel Mechel. Okay. We are on Yud Gimel on the base, starting the next parak. And the Mishnah starts out like this. Elu mitorim. If you say one of these words in a neder, they're mutter. The neder is meaningless. It's mutter. So if you say chulin she'ochalach, what I'm going to eat from you is chulin. Chulin is mutter to eat. So therefore it's no neder. If he goes on and says kabasar chazer, that what I'm eating from you is kabasar chazer, which we know is usher to eat, you're not allowed to eat, but still that's not a valid neder. And the Gemara will explain why. If he says kavoidus chachavim, what I'm eating from you is like avoidus chorim chachavim, or kaoros levuvim. Oros levuvim, the ora is oros. It's the skin of the animal. In the times they used to worship avoidus zora, they would bring an animal live to the mizbeach of the avoidus zora. They would cut open a hole in the skin, and they would take out the heart from the animal live and be makriv on the mizbeach, on their mizbeach. Okay, the skin, the animal itself, is an avodah zarah. The skin is not really an avodah zarah. It's what's called takruvos, a secondary to the avodah zarah, but it's also bana. So if somebody says oras levuvin, that's also it is in saying this thing is like an oras levuvin or knevelos utrefas. Something is a nevela or a trefa kashkotzim uramoshim or kashkotzim v'ramoshim. Kechalos Aaron, he says this thing is like the challah of Aaron that's separated. You take challah to give to the Kohanim, ukesrumastai, or this is like the truma that you separate to give to the Kohanim, mutter. In all these cases, it's mutter. It's not a neder. Why? Because you have to make a neder and say this thing is like something else. The something else that you're saying it's like has to be something that you could make usher through a neder. Chazer, or all these other things, nevelos, are also in the Torah. They're not made also through your neder. They're also through the Torah. So that is not a valid neder. And the Gemara will explain why it's not a valid neder. All right. So now the Mishnah says an interesting case. Ha'amar li'ishto. Somebody says to his wife, Harei at olai ki'ima. you are like me, to me like my mother. So just like I can't have relations with my mother, I cannot have relations with you, the wife. All right. That's what he says.
That's it. That's it.
Well, so following what we said before, that if you're saying simply something is also in the Torah, it would seem to be it should not be a valid netter. But yet, what does the Mishnah say? The Mishnah says, "Poskan lo Pesach." He has to go to a chacham, and he has to get a chacham to be matter this netter. We're making it valid. Now, the more explain why. Mimokamacher. And the Pesach, the opening that he has to give the Chacham the explanation as to why this netter should be mutter, has to come in Mokamacher. The Gemara was saying what Mokamacher means. You would say normally the Chacham, the guy would say, you know what, I never meant to shame my mother, that say I should have relations with her. That's the Pesach you cannot use. You have to give Pesach from Mimokamacher, somewhere else. So now the Mishnah says the reason. Shelo yokil roishtoi bekach. Because people might say this, and they might think it doesn't mean anything, but if they say such a thing, then they might come to say the wrong thing, and they might say the same thing in the right way, and that it would be yasser. So the Chum said, you make such a netter that you're answering your wife, your grandmother. The Chum said the netter is is valid, and you have to go to a Chacham and get a Torah. Now, min Torah, it's not a netter. It's only min Rabbanan, because the Rabbanan didn't want people to make Nedorim like this and say, okay, because if you say it's no good, right. So, okay. So the Gemara says, Taima, what's the reason the Mishnah says, the first case in the Mishnah, Chulin shoich halach, so Taima the Amar Chulin shoich halach, which means that what I'm eating from you is Chulin, which is mutter, right? Ha'omar, but what if you would have said, La Chulin shoich halach, which we discussed in the Gemara before, that lach lechulin could mean lo chulin, that this I want to eat from you is not chulin, it's kodesh. So mashma lo lechulin lahavish should not be chulin ella korban. So in other words, the Mishnah just said the simple case of chulin with no introductory le, to tell you chulin by itself is not a netter, because you're saying this is mutter, this is chulin. So the Gemara says, Moni Masnisan, who is the author of our Mishnah? So Rameir, if you want to say it's Rameir, so Halesle, but Rameir doesn't hold Michlal, going over to the top of your Yudal without Michal Lav Ata Shemei Hain. If you only hear a positive or a negative, you cannot infer the other one. So our Mishnah cannot be Rabbi Meir. Ella, our Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda. So the Gemara says, okay, our Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda. We said before the Mishnah in the last parak we talked about is also Rabbi Yehuda. So the Gemara says Hainu Reisha. Okay, so we've already learned that this din in the previous Mishnah. So the Gemara says, Ella Rabbi Yehuda. If we have to say it's Rabbi Yehuda, the Hainu Reisha, the Gemara says, Aidi diktani kabasar chazer. Since the Mishnah started out by listing a whole other list of chain of things that are usher, not because of a nether, but because of the Torah, kabasar chazer, kavodas rechavim, lahachik tanichuan. So therefore, the Mishnah added on chuan to tell you, just like if you said what I'm eating is kabasar chazer, is mutter, it's the same way if you said what I'm eating is like chuan, it's also mutter. But the Mishnah really did not need to tell you it. Ravina says that a different terence. Hachiktani. What the Mishnah meant by saying chuan, elu mitoran, these words, if you say I'm eating this should be kabasar chazer, it's ki'ilu like saying kechuan. Like I said, this kikar is to me kechuan. So that's what the Mishnah, that's what Ravina says the Mishnah is telling you. That elu mitoran kechuan. Just like I would say this is chuan, it's mutter. So if I say this kikor is like kabasar chazer, it's also mutter. So the Gemara says, then the Gemara goes on and mentions some of the other things in the Mishnah. Kabasar chazer, kavodas chachavim. So the Gemara says, "Ilo tanachuan hava mina." If the Mishnah wouldn't have taught this to tell you that if you say these phrases, there's mutter, I might have thought hava mina boyish ela. That even though that maybe midrabanan, it's a valid netter, and you would have to go ask the chacham. So the Mishnah comes to tell you that it's not true. Even midrabanan, it's not a valid netter, just like midraisa is not a valid netter, and these things are mutter. How could you think so? Because the Seifa says, Ha'omar le'ishto, somebody says to his wife, Harei at alai ki'ime, you are like to me on me like my mother. Paiskan lo Pesach. So you see that if you say something where midraisa it's not a valid nether, still from the Seifa, you see that midrabanan it is a nether, and you have to go through the Pesach. And Paiskan lo Pesach mokamacher. So mechlal the ratio lo boyish. So you see that the if you said that this is a like a basar chazer, even midrabanan, it's mutter, and you don't need sheila. Only in the case of the safe, the ratio lo boyish sheila. Allah, so the Gemara says machvarta that chuan memela naspa. The chuan. The word chuan there in the Mishnah is not needed, and the Mishnah just added it on. The whole purpose of the Mishnah is not to tell you the word chuan, it's telling the other things after that. Menohaini miwi. How do we know that if I say that this kikor is like basar chazer? So how do I know that it's not valid? So the Gemara says, Amar Kra, ish ki yidor neder lashem. Okay, so it says neder lashem. A second, it says yidor, and then it says the word neder. So that second word neder is superfluous. It's extra. It just Torah could have said ish ki yidor lashem. Why does it say neder? So the word neder comes to tell you ad sheyidor, until you make a nether bedover hanodor. That's something that could become usher through a nether. So you say this kikar is on me like a korban. A korban comes usher to the person through the person making a nether and saying this animal is a korban. It's hegdish. So that's how the Gemara learns the pasuk ad sheyidor bedover hanodor. So if you make a neder and say this is like basar chazer, which doesn't become also through a neder, becomes also through the Torah, so it's not a valid neder. Break the Gemara, if so, a few of the davar osir nami. I could tell you that even if you make a neder using something and saying this is like something that's davar osir, see, but the pasuk says, and this pasuk is talking the same pasuk, but the end, going further in the pasuk says lestor isur al nafto, to make an isur, to put an isur on his nefesh. So why does it say le'asor isur? So I could learn then that isur means that I can asur something that's asur to me already from the Torah on myself. So the Gemara says, well, no. Lesor isur mevoy leka desanya. I need that lesor isur, the double words, to teach you something else. Ezehu isur ha'omer v'Torah. What is when we talk about something that's usur? The Torah says lesser isur, something that's usur. What does the Torah mean? Right? To tell you, like is. And then the pasuk goes on to tell you less or isur, like it's you said by neder, that yidur ish neder, yidur neder lashem. It has to be dafka in that way, so you can't learn from less or isur. Okay. So the Gemara goes on to the last piece of the Mishnah. You are like my mother. So the Gemara says, Raminu, I ask you a kasha. There's another brisa that says, Hareyat are like a basima. You, he's talking to his wife, are on me kebasime, like my mother. And that brisa says, or kebasar achosi, like my sister, orla, like Orla, or kaklaya kerem, lo omer klum. He didn't say anything. So this brisa seems to apply that even the rabbanan, it's not a valid neder. You don't need a pesach. So the more answers, Amar Abaya, lo omer klum with the brisa. The brisa means lo amar klum, that mina Torah, it's not a valid neder, because you can't be matfis b'davar ha'asr. Mina Torah lo amar klum, but v'tzorach te'ela midrabanan. But the rabbis said that if a person makes such a neder, and the rabbis didn't want people to make nedorim like this, so they ashered it midrabanan. That's Rava's teretz, and that's Abaya's teretz. Rav Amar, Rava says that ha b'tamidei chachamim ha b'amoret, that the brisa that says lo amar klum is talking about a Talmud Chacham, because we're not afraid the Talmud Chacham is going to make a neder saying that his wife should be in him like his mother. He knows better, right? So therefore, if he said such a thing, even with the Rabbanan, it's mutter, he doesn't need shayla. But what about the Mishnah? The Mishnah says it is aser. Ha b'amoretz. But where an amoretz who doesn't know what the halacha is, and amoretz says such a thing, so then we're afraid that maybe he's going to get used to saying such things and going to say it the wrong way at the wrong time. So there they said b'amoretz that he has to get shiur. He has to go to a chacham. And the Gemara says v'hasanya, and I have a brisa that proves this. Hanoder, or makes a shua b'Torah. And as we see, the Bryce is going to explain what's going on, but basically the Bryce is talking about you have a Sefer Torah sitting in front of you. All right? You have a Sefer Torah on the table, and you say, I make a shvua by this Torah that I'm not going to eat this piece of bread. Now, what does that mean to you? So by saying by this Torah, you could mean the Haskaras, God's name mentioned in it, and that would be a valid shvua. Or it could mean the parchment, which means nothing, right? So that's the more I want to understand. What does it mean? Okay, so Hanoda B'Torah. So the Brisa says lo amar klum. He didn't say anything because we're going to assume that what he means when he says I'm not going to eat this piece of bread like this Torah. He's referring to the parchment. He's not referring to Hashem's name in it. He's referring to the parchment. Rav Yochanan says that Sarach Eila lechacham. Rabbi Yochanan says, okay, min rabbanan, since he said this, we could interpret it to mean maybe he means the name, God's names. So therefore he needs Eila lechacham. All right. The Amr of Nachman, and Rav Nachman goes on and says, the Talmud Chacham Ein Sar Sheila, that even Rabbi Yochanan said Sar Sheila Chacham Rabbanan, that's only by an Amorit. But a Talmud Chacham does not need Sheila. And this is the proof. This is the proof from the Brisa to the way we learned the Mishnah before. On the top of Yudalad base. Sanya, we learned in the Brisa. Hanoda b'Torah. Somebody swears there's a Torah in front of him. He says, by this Torah, I am going to do this, or I'm not going to do this. Lo amar klum. Because we presume that he's referring to the parchment and not to God's names in it. But if he says, Bama shekosaba, what's written in it, and what's written in it is God's name, so then he's making a shvua in God's name, and if he says, Bama shekosaba, I'm not going to eat this, or I am going to eat it, it's a valid shvua. Bama shekosaba, devorav kayomen. Then it's a valid shvua, and his words are in effect. If he says, what if he says the following? Ba, in it, ubamasha kosaba. He says in it, meaning the parchment, ubamasha kosaba, and what's written in it, Devorav Kayamin, then his words are valid. Katani, the more says, we learned in the Brisa, if somebody says, the master Kosabo, he says he swears by what's written in this Torah, Devorav Kayamin. It's a valid shvua. So the more says, Ba of a master Kosabo, if he says both Lashonos, he says it, and what's written in it, right? Storach lemeimar. Do I need to tell you that? If you're telling me that Bamasha Kosabo, just if he just says Bamasha Kosabo is a valid, so then if he says Ba Ubamasha Kosabo, why do we need to tell it? Why do I need to tell it? So that's the Gemara's kasha. So Amar of Nachman, Rav Nachman says lo kasha. It's not a kasha. It's not a problem. Ha the machase oraisa aara. The sefer where he says ba u'amashikosaba is talking about where the Sefer Torah is laying on the ground. It's right. He's not holding it. It's in front of him. So there, if he said ba, I could be saying he's only referring to the parchment. And now when he says Mamash Kosabo, he means the Shemus, right? And the second case, the middle case, is talking about the Nukat Biyode. He's holding the Sefer Torah in his hand, and he says, Mamash Kosabo, what's written in it, then Devor of Kayomim. But if the Sefer Torah, he was not holding it, then he has to say both Ba and Mamash Kosabo. All right? That's from Nachman's teretz. Because Machasa al Aro, if the Sefer Torah is on the ground, he's not holding it, then Daite Agavil. We were saying when he was referring to the Sefer Torah, he's referring to the parchment. So he could be referring to the words on the parchment, not necessarily the shemos. So that's why he has to say ba v'masha kotzeba. All right, but noket la biyadai. But if he's actually holding the Sefer Torah and he refers to the Sefer Torah that he's holding, then we know for sure he's referring not to the physical parchment, but he's referring to the shemos that are in the Noka Labiyada Daite alas Koras Shabbat. We know for sure if he's holding it that he's referring to God's name, which is in the Sefer Torah, Hashem's name, which is in the Sefer Torah. And if he's referring to Hashem's name, it's a valid shvuah. And I will give you another explanation. That the middle case is talking about Mamachasa al Ara. The Sefer Torah is sitting in front of him. He's not holding it. The Kivan, but since the Omar Bamash Kosaba, what's written in the Sefer Torah, so we assume that he's referring to the Shemos, is Mahani. It helps. And then if you say that, then once you know this, then you don't really need to say this next case where he says ba uvamasha kasaba.
Plenty of instances, both in Tanakh and in the Gemara, where somebody says Chai Hashem im, or he says Elohim, im.
Right.
You have to say, Torah or Masha Kasaba, you could just say Elohim or Chai Hashem.
Right. But
I mean, it's just.
I understand what you're saying. Right.
I mean,
It's God's name that way. Yeah, he doesn't want to mention that. He doesn't want to mention it.
Right. I guess he doesn't want to.
I mean, right.
People did because it's in Tanakh.
I think the Gemara's trying to tell you there's a difference if a person makes a shvuah and saying that he's noted b'Torah, b'masha kostavar, ba, and there's a difference in his kavana depending on whether he's. That's the difference. I think the Gemara is trying to tell you. There's a difference in this kavana whether he's holding it or it's laying on the ground.
It's strange that they keep on saying ara on the ground. It's laying on the ground.
Right.
But it sounds maybe one toe is on a shulchan, maybe, so.
And the art scroll says this does not mean
I
literally.
mean, I assume I'm translating the word literally.
Listen, the article says the main is laying on something.
Huh?
It's resting somewhere other than in the sun.
Yeah.
The literal translation of the word, though.
That's it.
But Eretz is not Adama. Eretz can be
It could code that.
the air can be Eretz too. Eretz
Everything
is
is coded.
it's a very
Right. I mean, okay. So that's answers. Viva, what you saying? I'll give you another explanation of the brisa. Kula mitziyasa nami. The nakat lebiyade. It's talking about the middle case where he says Bamasha Kosabo. It's talking about where he's holding it in his hand. Okay? He's holding the Sefer Torah in his hands, and he says, Bamasha Kosabo, I'm going to eat this or I'm not going to eat this. Right? The ha kamash malon, the kivan the noket laibiyada. It comes to tell you this instinct it's holding in his hand. Afal gab the lo omar ella ba. It even though he says ba, it's command omer b'mashakosabel dami. So the last case is coming to tell you that even if he says he's holding it in his hand, and he says ba, which means we've said before the physical parchment. But since he's holding in his hand, it's like he says uba masha kasaba, and that's the say for the Bryson. And we'll stop here, and Mordecai will pick up tomorrow.
Right.
Okay. For the first Mishnah, you go to somebody's house, you're not sure if it's kashrus. You say,